So, Melanie, you're a journalist and you just released your second book or magazine called The Blend. Now, I've been lucky to get my hands on it and I've had a bit of a read, and I know I was interviewed for it, so I thought it'd be really cool to interview the interviewer.
Thank you, Bella. I so prefer being on your side, being the interviewer, but I'm happy to be interviewed about this project, and we're so happy to have your involvement in it as well.
So can you explain what The Blend is and how it came about?
Absolutely. So The Blend is, like you say, a magazine-style resource. It will be in print and digital online. It launches during Feeding Tube Awareness Week this year, so Feb 6. And it's something that I needed when I first entered the tube feeding space with my son, Arlo, who's 5, almost 6, almost a year ago. After orally feeding for his whole life, he had a G-tube put in and went from purees to 6 bottles of formula a day. And the transition was shocking, really bad. So that inspired me to sort of delve deeper into tube feeding. I obviously needed to learn more to support my son. I also felt very alone and a bit freaked out. And the same as when I wrote my book, Special, when we first got Arlo's disability diagnosis, sort of writing is a way that I work through things and sort them out in my head and make myself feel better. And with my first book, I interviewed a whole bunch of parents raising kids with all kinds of disabilities all over the world. And for this project, I did something similar. I interviewed a whole bunch of parents tube feeding their kids, but I also interviewed adults, young adults like yourself who tube feed themselves, and a bunch of professionals who are working in the tube feeding space. So it's a big mishmash of stories and advice from people who are tube feeding, families who are tube feeding. And what I love about this is it looks great. I had a good friend of mine, Edie, who's a designer I used to work with at a magazine, design it for me. And she's just made it look like a gorgeous, glossy lifestyle magazine. Beautiful pictures. I think when you enter spaces like this, you tend to be handed an ugly pamphlet, if anything. And I really wanted families and people to have something beautiful to look at so they could see that their lifestyle wasn't going to be this awful thing. You know, there are so many ways that people are tube feeding and making it their own and making it work. And, you know, they're leading wonderful lives. And I wanted families like mine to be able to see something like that.
So pretty. It could just be a coffee table book, you know?
Yeah.
So what was your introduction to tube feeding with Arlo?
Like I said, it was rough and it was abrupt. So for years, you know, Arlo struggles to eat. He's got quad CP, which affects the muscles in his face and his mouth. So we've been feeding him purees with a lot of assistance for his whole life. But it looked like he was getting stronger with that. We were moving up to, you know, more chunky pureed food, seeing feeding specialists who were all encouraging us to sort of keep going in this direction. But then right before his 5th birthday, we did a modified barium swallow X-ray test, and it showed that he was silently aspirating on every single drop of water and bite of food that was going into him. So we knew that a tube was a possibility for Arlo, but we were hopeful that it wouldn't be. So this was quite a rude shock. And it was suggested to us that he have an NG put in temporarily on the way to a G-tube, but we'd seen NGs go in and out of Arlo in hospital too many times, and we didn't want to go through that. So we said, no, just get the G-tube into him. We were lucky, a surgeon, really loved the guy, could do it in a couple of weeks. So very quickly we had the surgery booked. He went in, had the peg put in. That procedure went fine, but Arlo got pneumonia in hospital. And honestly, having spoken to so many other people now who've been through this procedure, I haven't heard one single story where the person didn't get sick and spend, you know, sometimes months in hospital afterwards. So that was interesting. We were in hospital for a week, and then he came out, and like I said, he was just on commercial formula, 6 bottles a day. Going forward, we were told at the time, look, blends is something you can look into later for Arlo, but you need to get the formula right first. And the formula was not going well. Arlo was getting so much reflux and aspirating. Once we discovered blends, which happened after I linked in with the parent community, I was lucky. I was interviewed on a podcast, the 2Ps podcast, right in the middle of this big mess, and said to them, this isn't going very well. And their beautiful community, as soon as they heard the episode, reached out to me and said, just try blends. And we did. We just blended up what he used to eat, a bit thinner, put it in his tube, and from that day on, it's been so much better. And we've now discovered wonderful products like Wholesome Blends, which is the pantry stable pouch, so we don't have to cook and blend all of his meals, and we can get out and about with those. But yeah, now that he's on blended feeds, it's the best. He's put on 3 kilos in 6 months. He's got all this color and vibrancy that he's never had before. He's in great shape. So it's come good, but it took a while to get there.
It's really great that he's found what works for him. And I know you can hear a little bit more about Wholesome Blends in the book as well.
Absolutely. Sarah Thomas is in there. She was one of the first mums I connected with, and she's been wonderful. She's a mum of twins, one of whom has been tube fed for a while. And yeah, like I said, she created this incredible product that means we don't have to cook and blend meals every time we feed our kid. And it's just so freeing. And yeah, a great product called Wholesome Blends.
And that's awesome. So before you were introduced into the tubie world, did you have any previous knowledge or experience with tube feeding?
No, I wanted to avoid it. It was something that, we took pride in Arlo's eating, and we loved cooking up his purees. We even had like a cookbook idea in the works called Hip Hip Puree, thinking, this is something we could make, No, we really, I don't know what it is about feeding. We've gone through quite a bit with Arlo. Like his physical disability is quite severe. He's non-mobile, so he probably won't be able to walk by himself. He's non-verbal. But we kind of, came around and realized, that's okay. Those things are okay. But something about the eating really got to us. So we were quite devastated when we realized, here's something else that he won't be able to participate in. But no, prior to Arlo needing a tube, I'd had very little to do with it. A few of his little friends had tubes, I knew that, but otherwise I knew nothing.
Did you find it hard adjusting to being a tubie parent?
It's interesting because it was different. I remember I found it very hard to adjust to being a disability parent, like a parent to a child with disability, because I just pushed and pushed against it and was so in denial and so like, no. But, with the becoming a tubie parent, I was instantly embraced by this huge community of other parents. And, parents raising kids with disabilities are great, as I have found, but there's something even more tight and awesome about, the tubie family. So it didn't take long for me to sort of enjoy being, embraced by this community. The technical side of tube feeding is really hard. That took a while to adjust to. And I remember the first few weeks, it all just felt so medical, especially because he was on just these little bottles of formula and he was tethered to a pump because we had to do it so slowly because of his reflux, and it just felt very medical and not right. And I remember getting really upset in those early weeks, just being surrounded by syringes and pumps and everything, and that really hit hard. And I was sort of like, oh my gosh, this is the rest of our lives. I had a hard couple of weeks there, but like I said, it came good. And now I'm having so much fun, with these other parents and people who tube feed. And I feel so lucky to be a part of this community now.
I just feel like it's growing every year. It's just getting bigger and bigger. And like, I mean, when I was, in the tubie world, when I was, 12 and, 8 to 12, I was, it wasn't as big as now, but it was definitely still like really amazing to have a community around you. And I had so many friends who had, feeding tubes as well. And that I'm sure like really helped, definitely helped me when I was younger.
Yeah, it's all about, knowing that it's not just you and having this community who gets it. And it's great. I know a friend of yours, John, is also in the magazine. And that's another thing that I was hoping that the magazine would achieve, is to show people, look, there's this massive community and this is just a tiny sample of people who are doing this thing. And I just, like you say, it just makes such a difference when you can be around people who are going through something similar.
Yeah, it's really great. It helps the parents and also helps the person with the feeding tube as well, to feel like they're not alone. And as well to feel like they're not alone, that there's other parents doing the same journey.
Definitely.
So did you connect with other tubie parents at the start of your journey, and did this help?
Pretty quickly. It's funny, I wanted to sort it out. It wasn't going well with the formula. And I was sort of like, that's okay, we'll get it right. But like I say, luckily I happened to be on this podcast episode with the 2Ps, and I told them how it was going, and instantly a lot of their peer community reached out, and that it was one of them that said to me, get in touch with Sarah Thomas, Wholesome Blends. And so very quickly I did connect with these other parents. But I don't take for granted how lucky I am that I had this opportunity to be on a podcast and talk about how I was feeling. Not many parents have that. So again, I'm really hoping that through resources like the blend, parents can see these communities and swiftly link in with them for support at the start of their journeys.
Yeah, social media is helping a lot with that too, you know, being able to reach a broader, you know, group and, you know, reach Australia wide now or even worldwide with the, you know, feeding tube world. It's really amazing.
Definitely. You just need to know where to go, where to click. And I think that information should be available to people and families from day dot, like as soon as they leave the hospital with their peg or prior even.
Yeah. So I heard that Arlo has a sibling that doesn't have a feeding tube. Does this make mealtimes difficult?
Mealtimes are difficult with young kids regardless, I think. But no, not really. Like I said, we've got, you know, they eat at the same time. Odie has a little table and chair that we called Cafe Odette that she sits at next to Arlo. I put his little, you know, I have a little tray that I put all of his tubes. I like to prep everything first and have all my tubes ready, put that on her table and she'll be there eating her meal, and then Arlo sits next to her in his wheelchair, and I'll admit it's in front of the television usually, but they dine together and I just syringe Arlo's food in and she eats next to him. And that's, yeah, it's not difficult. I think going into it, it was tricky, and it really sucked when Arlo was sort of on almost a continuous drip because there wasn't really defined meal times. But now that we're on blends, there is, and it's just breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And yeah, they eat together, which is lovely.
Mealtimes are such a you know, important thing in families where everyone has the time to like talk and about their day and just really connect where everyone's all at the same place. And it's really great that you can do that with your son and can you know, make sure that he's still involved in that as well.
Absolutely. That's been super important. It is so lovely that he can be at the table. Like you say, meal times are about so much more than the actual putting food in your mouth. They're about the social and, you know, the love and the family. So we still get that, which is wonderful.
So it was great to hear about your journey with tube feeding, but I have a few more questions about the blend. So I'm really curious to know how long it took you to put all this together.
It was pretty quick. So I came up with the idea. A friend of mine, Ingolese, she and I brainstormed it. And I think that was in May of last year. And then I just started interviewing and started putting it together. And then I found out about Feeding Tube Awareness Week through you guys at ausEE. And I was like, oh, there's my deadline. I've got to get this done and out there by February. I'm lucky in that my background is in magazines. I found this a lot easier to make than my book special because I'd never written a book before, but I've done a hell of a lot of interviews and magazine stories before. So I could put this together quite quickly. It also helps sort of desperately needing the information myself. You know, it was a selfish pursuit. I wanted to have these conversations and learn more. So, you know, that helped. And the fact that I got my friend Edie, my designer, on board, she came on board sort of quite soon into the process and just started making the articles. You know, she came up with the beautiful cover and the design, and so we were working together pretty quickly. But it was just so nice having her as well. You know, Special was quite a lonely journey making that book, but it was lovely having a co-creator in the blend with her. And yeah, we managed to get it together pretty quickly. It was a bit frantic, especially toward the end going to print, but we're here and excited to get it out.
Yeah, and it's so aesthetically pleasing as well. Like, I feel like all age groups will really like benefit from it as well.
Yeah, that was my hope. I really wanted to, you know, speak to a really broad audience of people and ages and scenarios. And you're right, like Edie, my designer, just nailed the aesthetic. I asked her for a combination of the Gentlewoman and Lunch Lady mag, and she's like, it's just exactly that. Like, I don't know if you can see, this is just a sample, so it's a bit different, but she's just nailed it. It's beautiful. The pictures are beautiful. I was so fortunate. Kate Dishaquill, this photographer and now friend of mine, had just happened to do a photo series of families who are tube feeding through the Succeed study group. And we were in hospital with Arlo at Sydney Kids and sort of saw these incredible photos. And I'm like, you're kidding me. How, like, and I got in touch with her and was like, can I run this series in the magazine? And it's funny when you start doing something and putting energy and like thought into it, things tend to come to you. I know I'm not that into woo-woo things, but I do feel if you put things out there and if you put your mind in this space, things sort of fall into place and start happening. And that's certainly what happened with this project.
So good. And it's also great to just have like a magazine that, you know, you're not embarrassed to show people. Like so many, you know, feeding tube books that are, you know, more towards the younger side of the group. And for older kids who have feeding tubes, or, you know, adults, they don't really have that sort of book that they can go to be like, hey, you get friends, like, here's some information about it, and here I am in a book that they're really proud of, and it looks beautiful as well.
Oh, see, I love the idea of like you being able to hand this out to your mates. And you're right, like there are some great resources. There's like the Abilities in Need tube feeding picture book for kids. But I find so often as a parent in the disability space, resources don't exist, or they're designed, they look like they're designed for kids. There's rainbow handwriting scrawled in kids writing on things. And I was like, nah, we deserve sexy resources. And I think, like I said, Edie's done such a great job on this. It's very sexy.
Were there any standout interviews you did?
They were all great. And I got something different out of all of them. Obviously, chatting with the parents, I got that sense of camaraderie and, you know, lots of helpful tips and things. Chatting with the professionals, I got really excited because I'm like, oh, there's definitely a movement toward blends among dietitians and pediatricians in the space. But honestly, it was, I think, speaking to adults like yourself and a few others that are in there was probably the most profound for me. Maybe because Arlo, my son, is nonverbal, and I was super keen to know what it felt like to tube feed, to try and get some understanding of what his experience was like. And I think it was really hopeful for me to see that, you know, there are adults in this world, tube feeding is not holding them back. I found this incredible artist, Kathy Lean, in Newcastle, who tube feeds, and she's welding and creating sculptures while tube feeding with the tube in her backpack and doing amazing things. And like, yeah, hearing stories from people like yourself who've been through tube feeding or are currently tube feeding was probably what opened my eyes the most, I guess, to this space and what this experience could be.
Well, I'm sure everyone wants to know this, but where can everyone get a copy?
So there was we've done 1,000 copies for the first print run, because beautiful Hireup, a disability support organisation, and beautiful Cardinal Health, who distribute kangaroo pumps and other medical equipment, paid for the print run. So 1,000 copies will be launched. Half of those will be distributed through Every Human, which is an incredible adaptive fashion label, during Feeding Tube Awareness Week. So for every order that they make or that comes to them, they will send out the package with a copy of the blend. So that's a really cool way to get one. I'm sending copies around to lots of pediatric therapy centres. There'll be quite a few copies at Napa. Sending copies to all my beautiful contributors. I'll be sending some to you guys at ausEE to distribute as well. I'm hoping to get more sponsorship, more support on board so I can do another, hopefully really big print run. So watch this space. But it's available digitally online. So theblendmag.com, you can go there. It's available to read, flip through for free. So I think that'll be probably the easiest way to access it, and fingers crossed for more print copies in the future.
Definitely. And make sure that nobody gets to miss out as well.
Yeah, that's it. And I wanted it to go global. You know, this is a very sort of Australian magazine. I kept it quite local, but I've had lots of interest from the US and UK. And I mean, it being digital means that it can go everywhere. And let's see what happens.
So this is your second book or magazine now. Do you have any plans on a third anytime soon?
No. But I said that about special. And I knew that it would take something really big happening to me. And you kind of don't want to wish that on yourself or your family, because I make these things out of desperation, you know, being in a really desperate place where I need to help myself and my own family. Saying that, this, like I said, I found a lot easier to put together, and I'd love to use the blend as a blueprint for making other resources for, you know, niche areas where there isn't much information. So if anyone's keen, I guess, to work with me, or if I can guide anyone else in other spaces through the process, I'd love that. Like I said, Hireup, this great disability support organisation who I do a lot of work with, I'm hoping to make a similar sort of guide to disability support for families, because that's another area where, you know, your kid gets a diagnosis, no one tells you about disability support workers, and they've become such an important and beautiful part of our lives. So I can see myself making other sort of magazine style resources like this in other areas if the opportunities do arise.
Now, lastly, do you have any tips or advice for any other tubie parents?
Yes. Read the blend. Go to the other great online resources like ausEE Inc., childfeeding.org. Get onto Instagram, Facebook. There are so many fantastic groups and accounts to follow. And I'd say just, you're really not in this by yourself. There are so many of us doing this. I think from what I could gather, there's around 50,000 people tube feeding across Australia and New Zealand alone. And look, just in terms of advice, like, you'll get good at this. It feels impossible at the start. I remember when I first did that little clip on the extension that comes out of the tube and being like, this is so fiddly and needing two hands and thinking this is really hard. And now I just do it with one hand, and I don't even think, and Arlo has a million medications that all need to be crushed and dissolved and put through as well. So it's quite complex, but it's just a dance now that we're used to. And, it can take some time to get it right. Formula wasn't right for Arlo. It's great for some people, but we needed to find our way to blend. So I'd say just really follow your gut. You know your kid or yourself better than anyone else. And if it's not coming from the medical professionals around you, look elsewhere. Once we decided to do blends, we had all the support in the world from our beautiful dietitian and pediatrician. It might, however, be on you to make that call, certainly, before blends are more accepted. But yeah, I guess the biggest thing is this: you'll get good at this, and this thing is good for you or good for your kid. It's gonna mean that they can thrive and be healthy and have a wonderful life. And yeah, that would be the biggest thing I'd say.
That's great advice. Thank you so much for letting me interview you today.
Oh, pleasure. You got me back. I interviewed you, so you're like, yeah, well, now it's your turn.